There is a powerful misunderstanding that many empaths carry throughout their lives. They believe that if they love harder, explain better, communicate more clearly, and reveal every corner of their heart, they will eventually be understood. They assume that transparency creates connection. They assume that honesty automatically builds intimacy. But when a super empath encounters an avoidant personality, this assumption often leads to frustration, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. One of the most important lessons a super empath must learn is the power of emotional boundaries. Most empaths grow up believing that love means openness, accessibility, and complete emotional transparency. They often feel that if they truly care about someone, they should be willing to share every thought, every feeling, and every wound. While this approach may seem healthy and honest, it can become dangerous when dealing with an avoidant personality. The super empath's natural desire to connect can slowly transform into a habit of overexposure, leaving them emotionally exhausted while receiving very little in return. A super empath is naturally drawn toward emotional depth. They want authentic conversations. They want genuine understanding. They want relationships where both people feel seen, heard, and valued. When they encounter an avoidant person, however, they often find themselves facing an invisible wall. No matter how much care they offer, no matter how much vulnerability they display, the avoidant seems to remain emotionally distant. This creates confusion because the empath assumes that more openness will solve the problem. Instead, it often intensifies it. The empath begins sharing more personal stories, revealing deeper fears, expressing stronger emotions, and offering increasingly detailed explanations of their feelings. They believe they are creating a bridge. What they fail to realize is that the avoidant often experiences this emotional intensity differently. Instead of feeling closer, the avoidant may feel overwhelmed. Instead of feeling connected, they may feel pressured. The very thing the empath believes will strengthen the relationship can sometimes cause the avoidant to retreat even further. This is where emotional boundaries become essential. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are filters designed to protect your emotional well-being. A super empath must understand that not everyone deserves immediate access to their deepest thoughts and feelings. Trust should be earned over time. Vulnerability should be shared gradually. Emotional intimacy is not something that should be handed over simply because feelings are strong. Many empaths struggle with this idea because they associate boundaries with selfishness. They fear that protecting themselves means they are becoming cold or uncaring. In reality, healthy boundaries are one of the purest forms of self-respect. They allow you to care for others without abandoning yourself. They allow you to love someone without making their emotional state your responsibility. When a super empath lacks boundaries, they often become trapped in a cycle of emotional overinvestment. They spend countless hours analyzing conversations, worrying about misunderstandings, and trying to solve problems that do not belong to them. Their happiness becomes tied to another person's reactions. If the avoidant is distant, the empath feels anxious. If the avoidant pulls away, the empath feels rejected. If the avoidant becomes silent, the empath feels responsible for fixing the situation. Over time, this creates emotional dependency disguised as love. Strong emotional boundaries break this cycle. They remind the empath that another person's behavior is not always their responsibility. They understand that they cannot force connection, create intimacy, or heal someone who is unwilling to heal themselves. They stop chasing explanations and start observing actions. They stop giving unlimited emotional access to people who have not demonstrated consistent trustworthiness. Perhaps the greatest power of emotional boundaries is that they preserve a person's sense of identity. Without boundaries, a super empath can become so focused on another person's needs that they lose sight of their own dreams, goals, and emotional needs. Their entire world begins revolving around maintaining a relationship. Boundaries help them remember who they are outside of that connection. The strongest super empaths are not the ones who give everything away. They are the ones who understand that their energy is valuable. They know that their emotions deserve protection. They recognize that vulnerability is a gift, not an obligation. And they learn that true strength is not found in endlessly opening every door of the heart. It is found in knowing which doors should remain closed until trust, respect, and genuine emotional safety have been earned. One of the most misunderstood aspects of an avoidant personality is their relationship with vulnerability. Many people assume that avoidants do not care about emotional connection, but the reality is often far more complex. In many cases, avoidants desire love, intimacy, and meaningful relationships just as much as anyone else. The difference lies in how they respond when emotional closeness begins to increase. For a super empath, Understanding this dynamic can be one of the most important lessons in navigating a relationship with an avoidant person. A super empath naturally views vulnerability as a pathway to connection. When they trust someone, they open their heart. They share their fears, dreams, insecurities, and emotional experiences. To them, vulnerability is a sign of strength. It creates understanding, builds trust, and deepens relationships. They often believe that if two people can openly discuss their emotions, almost any challenge can be overcome. An avoidant person often sees vulnerability through a very different lens. While they may appreciate emotional honesty on some level, deep vulnerability can also trigger discomfort, anxiety, or a strong desire for distance. This reaction is not always conscious. In many cases, it is rooted in experiences that taught them emotional closeness could lead to disappointment, loss of independence, criticism, rejection, or emotional pain. Over time, they learn to protect themselves by limiting how much of their inner world they reveal to others. When a super empath begins expressing deeper emotions, the avoidant may initially respond positively. They may enjoy the attention, appreciation, and emotional warmth. However, as the emotional bond grows stronger, something begins to change. The avoidant starts sensing increased expectations, responsibilities, or demands for intimacy. Even if those demands are never spoken aloud, they may perceive them internally. The closer the relationship becomes, the more vulnerable they feel. And vulnerability is often where their fears begin to emerge. The super empath usually interprets this withdrawal as a problem that needs to be solved. They assume that if they communicate more clearly, explain their feelings more deeply, or offer even greater reassurance, the distance will disappear. Unfortunately, this approach often creates the opposite effect. The avoidant may experience these efforts as emotional pressure. The more intensely the empath tries to create connection, the stronger the avoidant's instinct to create space. One reason avoidants fear deep vulnerability is because vulnerability requires surrendering control. When someone becomes emotionally important, there is always a risk of being hurt. There is a risk of rejection, disappointment, or abandonment. Avoidants often prefer maintaining a sense of independence because it feels safer than allowing another person to have significant emotional influence over their lives. Emotional distance becomes a form of self-protection. Another factor is the fear of losing personal freedom. Avoidants often place a high value on autonomy and self-reliance. They may worry that emotional intimacy will eventually lead to expectations they cannot meet. They fear becoming responsible for someone else's happiness or feeling trapped by obligations they never intended to accept. Even healthy expressions of love can sometimes be interpreted as attempts to limit their independence. For a super empath, this behavior can feel confusing and even painful. They may wonder why someone who claims to care suddenly becomes distant when the relationship starts becoming meaningful. The answer often has little to do with the empath's worth and much more to do with the avoidant's internal struggle. The avoidant is not necessarily running from the person. They are often running from the emotions that closeness creates within themselves. Understanding this distinction can change everything. A super empath begins to realize that not every emotional withdrawal is a reflection of their value. They stop viewing every moment of distance as a personal rejection. Instead, they recognize it as part of a deeper pattern that exists within the avoidant's emotional world. The most emotionally intelligent super empaths learn that vulnerability cannot be forced. Trust cannot be rushed. Emotional safety cannot be demanded. Genuine connection develops when both people choose to participate willingly. By understanding why avoidants fear deep vulnerability, the empath gains clarity, patience, and the wisdom to protect their own emotional well-being while navigating a relationship that often operates by a very different emotional blueprint. One of the most remarkable qualities of a super empath is a strength that often goes unnoticed, even by the empath themselves. Most people associate strength with confidence, power, influence, or the ability to dominate difficult situations. A super empath possesses a different kind of strength. Their power comes from their ability to understand emotions, recognize hidden pain, and maintain compassion in situations where others might become cold, defensive, or indifferent. However, this hidden strength is frequently misunderstood because it does not always appear powerful on the surface. Many super empaths spend years believing that their sensitivity is a weakness. They are often told they care too much, feel too deeply, or become overly invested in other people's problems. Because they absorb emotional information so easily, they may experience periods of exhaustion, disappointment, and heartbreak. As a result, they sometimes wish they could become less sensitive and more emotionally detached. What they fail to realize is that the very quality they see as a weakness is often the source of their greatest power. A super empath has the ability to notice things that others overlook. They can detect changes in someone's mood before a single word is spoken. They recognize emotional patterns hidden beneath behavior. They understand that anger often conceals fear, that arrogance can hide insecurity, and that emotional distance frequently masks unresolved pain. This level of awareness gives them a unique perspective on human nature. While others react only to what is visible, the empath often understands what is happening beneath the surface. This insight becomes especially important when dealing with avoidant personalities. An avoidant person may appear confident, independent, and emotionally unaffected. To most people, they seem distant simply because they prefer space. A super empath, however, often senses that there is more beneath the surface. They recognize subtle signs of emotional discomfort, fear of vulnerability, and internal conflict. They understand that emotional withdrawal is not always indifference. Sometimes it is protection. The challenge is that many super empaths misuse this gift. Instead of simply understanding what they observe, they feel responsible for fixing it. They believe that if they can identify the hidden wound, they can heal it. If they can understand someone's fears, they can remove them. If they can provide enough love and patience, they can transform another person's emotional patterns. This belief often leads to disappointment because understanding someone does not automatically give you the power to change them. The hidden strength of a super empath is not their ability to rescue people. It is their ability to remain compassionate without losing themselves. True emotional strength is not measured by how much pain you can absorb from others. It is measured by your ability to care deeply while maintaining your own emotional stability. A super empath becomes powerful when they stop confusing compassion with responsibility. Another aspect of this hidden strength is resilience. Super empaths often experience emotional pain more intensely than most people. Because they feel deeply, they are affected deeply. Yet despite this sensitivity, many continue showing kindness even after being hurt. They continue believing in growth, healing, and meaningful connection even after facing disappointment. This ability to remain open-hearted in a world that often rewards emotional distance is a form of courage that should never be underestimated. A super empath also possesses the rare ability to create emotional safety. People often find themselves opening up around them without fully understanding why. Their presence communicates acceptance rather than judgment. Their ability to listen allows others to feel understood. This emotional intelligence helps build trust and connection in ways that force, pressure, or manipulation never could. Yet perhaps the greatest hidden strength of all emerges when a super empath learns self-control. Many people assume emotional power means expressing every feeling immediately. In reality, one of the highest forms of emotional intelligence is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The strongest super empaths understand that not every truth must be shared, not every battle must be fought, and not every relationship must be saved. When a super empath begins recognizing their true strength, they stop seeking validation from people who cannot appreciate their value. They stop proving their worth through sacrifice. They stop measuring their importance by how much they can give. Instead, they learn to direct their empathy with wisdom. They understand that their sensitivity is not a flaw to overcome, but a gift to manage carefully. And once that realization takes hold, the super empath becomes far more powerful than they ever imagined possible because their strength is no longer controlled by the reactions, approval, or emotional availability of anyone else. One of the most painful lessons a super empath eventually learns is that oversharing can come with a significant emotional cost, especially when dealing with an avoidant personality. Empaths are naturally open-hearted individuals. They often believe that honesty is the foundation of every meaningful relationship. Because they value emotional transparency, they tend to share their thoughts, feelings, fears, and personal experiences freely. To them, openness feels natural. It feels like trust. It feels like connection. Yet when this openness is directed towards someone who struggles with emotional intimacy, the results can be very different from what the empath expects. A super empath often assumes that revealing more of themselves will create greater closeness. If there is distance in the relationship, they share more. If there is confusion, they explain more. If there is tension, they express more feelings. Their instinct is always to communicate, clarify, and connect. They believe that understanding grows through openness. While this approach can be effective with emotionally available people, it often becomes problematic when interacting with an avoidant individual. Avoidants frequently experience emotional closeness differently. They may appreciate sincerity, but they can also become overwhelmed by emotional intensity. When a super empath begins revealing every concern, every fear, and every emotional reaction, the avoidant may feel pressured rather than connected. What the empath views as vulnerability, the avoidant may interpret as emotional weight. Instead of moving closer, they may begin creating more distance. This creates a frustrating cycle. The empath notices the withdrawal and assumes more communication is needed. They share even more of their inner world. They explain their intentions, discuss their worries, and reveal deeper vulnerabilities. The avoidant, feeling increasingly overwhelmed, often withdraws further. Each person is responding according to their natural instincts, yet both end up moving farther apart. One of the hidden costs of oversharing is the loss of emotional mystery. Healthy relationships develop gradually. Trust is built over time through consistent experiences and mutual respect. When a super empath reveals everything too quickly, they sometimes give away emotional access that has not yet been earned. They place their deepest feelings in the hands of someone who may not yet possess the emotional capacity to handle them responsibly. Another cost is emotional exhaustion. Oversharing often requires repeated explanations, repeated vulnerability, and repeated attempts to gain understanding. The empath may spend countless hours discussing the relationship, analyzing interactions, and expressing emotions. Over time, this effort becomes draining. They begin investing more emotional energy than they receive in return. The relationship starts feeling like work rather than connection. Oversharing can also unintentionally reduce personal boundaries. A super empath may become so focused on being understood that they stop protecting their own emotional space. They reveal private fears, insecurities, and personal struggles to someone who has not demonstrated the ability to provide emotional safety. When those disclosures are met with indifference, discomfort, or withdrawal, the empath often feels exposed and hurt. Another challenge is that excessive vulnerability can create an imbalance in the relationship. The empath becomes emotionally transparent, while the avoidant remains guarded. One person is sharing everything, while the other shares very little. This imbalance often leaves the empath feeling emotionally naked, while the avoidant maintains control over how much of themselves is revealed. The cost of oversharing becomes even greater when the empath begins using vulnerability as a strategy to create connection. Instead of expressing emotions for personal authenticity, they start expressing them in hopes of changing the avoidant's behavior. They hope that if the avoidant truly understands their pain, they will become more attentive, more affectionate, or more emotionally available. Unfortunately, emotional disclosures cannot force someone to change. They cannot create readiness where none exists. The most emotionally mature super empaths eventually recognize that vulnerability is valuable precisely because it is selective. Not everyone deserves immediate access to the deepest parts of your heart. Emotional intimacy should unfold naturally as trust develops. Sharing less does not mean caring less. It means understanding the importance of emotional timing and emotional safety. True wisdom emerges when a super empath realizes that self-respect and vulnerability must work together. Being open-hearted does not require revealing everything. Being honest does not require exposing every wound. Some emotions deserve privacy, some experiences deserve protection, and some parts of the soul should only be shared with people who have consistently demonstrated the ability to honor them with care, maturity, and genuine understanding. One of the greatest challenges a super empath faces is learning how to protect their energy and maintain their sense of self-worth while navigating relationships with emotionally unavailable people. Because empaths naturally focus on understanding others, they often become so invested in another person's emotions that they forget to monitor their own. Their compassion becomes directed outward, while their own emotional needs remain neglected. Over time, this imbalance can create exhaustion, confusion, and a gradual loss of confidence. A super empath possesses a rare ability to connect deeply with people. They notice emotional shifts that others miss. They sense discomfort behind silence and pain behind anger. This awareness allows them to provide comfort, understanding, and support. However, this same gift can become a burden when it causes them to absorb the emotional struggles of everyone around them. Instead of simply recognizing another person's feelings, they begin carrying them. When dealing with an avoidant personality, this tendency often becomes even stronger. The avoidant's emotional distance creates uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally activates the empath's desire to understand. The empath starts paying closer attention to every message, every conversation, and every change in behavior. They search for clues, analyze patterns, and attempt to solve problems that may not even belong to them. As a result, a tremendous amount of emotional energy is spent focusing on someone else's internal world. The danger is that energy is not unlimited. Every relationship requires emotional investment, but healthy relationships involve mutual effort. When one person consistently gives more than they receive, emotional depletion becomes inevitable. A super empath may begin feeling tired without understanding why. They may lose enthusiasm for activities they once enjoyed. Their thoughts become consumed by the relationship, and their emotional well-being starts depending on another person's actions. Protecting your energy begins with recognizing that empathy is a gift, not a responsibility. Understanding someone's pain does not mean you are required to fix it. Recognizing someone's struggles does not make you accountable for their healing. Every person must take ownership of their own emotional growth. The empath can offer support, but they cannot carry the entire burden. Self-worth is closely connected to this lesson. Many super empaths unknowingly tie their value to how much they can help others. They feel important when they are needed. They feel worthy when they are giving. While generosity is admirable, self-worth that depends on external validation becomes fragile. If someone withdraws, becomes distant, or fails to appreciate their efforts, the empath may begin questioning their own value. True self-worth operates differently. It is not based on another person's attention, affection, or approval. It comes from recognizing your inherent value, regardless of how others behave. A super empath becomes stronger when they understand that their worth does not decrease simply because someone cannot recognize it. Another person's emotional limitations do not define your importance. Protecting your energy also requires learning the power of emotional detachment. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means refusing to let another person's choices control your emotional state. You can care deeply while still maintaining emotional balance. You can love someone without making them the center of your identity. The healthiest super empaths understand that their energy is precious. They become selective about where they invest it. They stop chasing people who continuously create distance. They stop proving their worth through endless sacrifice. They begin prioritizing relationships that offer respect, reciprocity, and genuine emotional connection. In doing so, they preserve not only their energy, but also the deep sense of self-worth that allows them to remain compassionate without losing themselves in the process. One of the most overlooked forms of power in any relationship is silence. Most people assume that power comes from having the perfect argument, the perfect explanation, or the perfect response. They believe that influence is created through words. A super empath often falls into this pattern because communication is one of their natural strengths. They want to express their feelings clearly, resolve misunderstandings quickly, and create emotional closeness through honest conversation. However, when dealing with an avoidant personality, there comes a point where silence becomes far more powerful than any explanation ever could. For many super empaths, silence feels uncomfortable. They are naturally drawn toward connection, and connection usually involves communication. When tension appears in a relationship, their instinct is to talk about it. When distance develops, they want to understand it. When conflict arises, they seek resolution. They believe that every problem can be improved through greater emotional awareness and deeper conversation. The challenge is that avoidants often respond differently. While the empath moves toward emotional discussion, the avoidant may move away from it. The more questions they receive, the more pressure they feel. The more they are encouraged to discuss emotions, the stronger their desire for space may become. This creates a frustrating dynamic where one person pursues understanding while the other seeks distance. Many super empaths make the mistake of believing that silence means weakness. They assume that if they stop explaining, stop persuading, or stop reaching out, they are giving up. In reality, there is a significant difference between surrendering and choosing silence. Surrendering means abandoning your value. Silence means recognizing that not every situation requires your energy. Silence becomes powerful because it breaks unhealthy patterns. In many relationships between empaths and avoidants, a cycle develops. The avoidant pulls away, and the empath chases. The avoidant becomes distant, and the empath seeks answers. The avoidant remains silent, and the empath fills the silence with messages, explanations, and emotional effort. Over time, this cycle becomes predictable. Each person unconsciously expects the other to play their role. When the super empath learns the power of silence, the pattern changes. Instead of chasing, they pause. Instead of over-explaining, they observe. Instead of reacting immediately, they allow space. This shift is often surprising because it demonstrates emotional strength rather than emotional desperation. The empath is no longer trying to force a connection. They are allowing reality to reveal itself. Silence also creates clarity. Constant communication can sometimes mask the truth of a situation. Endless explanations, repeated discussions, and emotional negotiations may temporarily reduce discomfort, but they do not always solve underlying problems. Silence allows actions to become visible. Without constant words filling the space, people begin revealing who they truly are through their behavior. Another reason silence is powerful is because it protects emotional energy. Every explanation requires effort. Every attempt to gain understanding requires emotional investment. Every effort to convince someone of your value consumes time and mental resources. A super empath who constantly explains themselves often becomes exhausted. Silence preserves that energy. It allows them to redirect their attention toward their own growth, goals, and well-being. Mastering silence does not mean becoming emotionally unavailable. It does not mean punishing others through withdrawal. It means understanding that your value does not depend on being heard by everyone. Some people will misunderstand you, no matter how clearly you explain yourself. Some people will remain distant regardless of how much love you offer. Some people are simply not ready for the level of emotional connection you desire. The strongest super empaths eventually discover that silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of self-control. It is the ability to resist the urge to chase, convince, or prove. It is the confidence to let actions speak louder than explanations. Most importantly, it is the wisdom to understand that real strength is not found in saying more. It is found in knowing when nothing more needs to be said.